everyone's diagnosis process with ADHD is different. Some choose the route with medication, others have different results and decide that's not what's going to work best for them. The guest in this episode is Robin, and he was diagnosed at the age of 27. He's got a very interesting story, also involved in different projects. And one of the things we got to talk about is how to define when enough is enough and perhaps when it's too much. What are the different mechanisms that you can use to decide when you're getting spread too thin? As it's something that happens to folks with ADHD, can be impulsive, like the rush of starting things that are new. But Robin identifies very well what the strengths of his ADHD are, whether it's the amount of energy that he can dedicate to projects, his ability to be very, very focused. Sometimes that has a downside of being too observant to the point of being caught up in details that perhaps others might not find as relevant. But it's all a question of balance. And I really, really enjoyed this conversation with him, and I'm sure you will too. Robin's also a mentor, and something for the first time that we're mentioning in this episode of the podcast is that if you have ADHD, if you know somebody who does, don't be afraid to reach out, right? Available on Twitter, available on LinkedIn, different Slack channels. Anyway, big shout out to Robin for this episode. I think you're going to like it. Cheers. Rocking out with another episode of ADHme, ADHwe. This time I'm joined by a fellow CNCF ambassador, Robin Smorenburg, who's in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, we did not coincide at KubeCon, but here we are today. Robin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Absolute pleasure. Now, just to jump right into it, can you give us a little bit of background about who you are and what you do when you're not a CNCF ambassador?
Absolutely. Next to being a CNCF ambassador, I'm also an Azure MVP. I run a live stream called Streaming Clouds. By day, I'm a lead cloud architect at NordCloud, a local Azure practice lead. I had created 2 courses for LinkedIn as a LinkedIn learning instructor. So the second one is about to be released at the end of this month. What else? I think that sums it up, right?
That's a pretty good collection. Yeah. And then you also, I think I saw on LinkedIn that you also do some kind of coaching.
Yeah. I do mentor a couple of people. Yeah. And
very good.
I'm playing around with the idea of doing that a little bit more over the rest of this year. But, I have a tendency to pick more up than I can carry or, bite more than I can chew. So, I try to be a little bit more deliberate about what I take on.
That's good. I think that's something we can probably dive deeper on because it's a problem I definitely suffer from. Signing up for lots of stuff and not being able to maintain things and always getting excited about something new and trying to find the balance between, getting bored and getting burned out. Sometimes it's a fine line to be walked. That being said, can you take us back a little bit about how did your ADHD story begin?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got diagnosed when I was 27. So I'm 34 now. So that's like 7 years ago, 2016. My mom got diagnosed because she wanted to understand certain things about her behavior and how she operated. And somebody told her like, oh, that sounds like ADHD. So she got diagnosed. She didn't push me, but she recommended me to get diagnosed. So I did that. Well, I do have ADHD. And that led me to, trying medication and figuring some other things out and putting a lot of my things into perspective. Like, okay, this is where this is coming from, or I can classify this a little bit better. So I tried medication, both Ritalin and dexamphetamine or Adderall, like some people may recognize that. But it made me feel weird, so it was not really my jam. Plus, the idea of being on permanent medication just freaked me out. So at that point, I was like, yeah, okay, I'm 27. I managed to do pretty well. So why not just build on top of that with the additional information that I have now, right? Or the additional information that I have available right now.
With that in mind, it's interesting that a fair amount of the people that we've talked to on the podcast have gone down the medication route, and some with mixed results and often changing from one to the other and sometimes taking breaks. And actually recently I was told by my psychiatrist, who's the one who prescribed it medication initially, that it's healthy to take breaks every so often, regardless of what you're taking, because it reduces the likelihood of there being a sort of tolerance built up or some kind of dependency. But in your case, you mentioned that, you sort of felt weird. And I'm not saying that there haven't been times where that was the case and I started with one and switched to another. When you talk about weird, what was that feeling?
Oh, it limited my creativity. I need to go down the rabbit hole a little bit, but from what I remember, it limited my creativity, my multitasking. It was easier for me to focus, right? So that was easier, but multitasking was affected negatively. What else? I just feel like a different person, not like me, right? I'm like, yeah, what? And of course, I gave it a lot of time, like a couple of months, but especially the dexamphetamine made me what's the right word? Sweaty, maybe, right? So yeah, I didn't feel good using that, and I had to take it, and occasionally multiple times a day, different dosages. Sometimes I took too much, so it felt like I was on a hardcore party again, right? Um, so yeah, it's weird. I don't know how to better describe it.
No, that definitely works. And I think that, I think it's just something that a frequent topic of conversation inside all this is the fact that everybody's experience is going to be a little bit different. And I was talking to somebody about this actually in KubeCon who also has ADHD, of saying that there needs to be built in a sort of acceptance that as much as we have the idea that, oh, this is going to be a 180-degree change and that everything is, it's going to be exactly how I want it to be, at least in my case, that hasn't been what I've gone through. And so part of it's just accepting that it's not going to be exactly as you like, and that what's good enough is good enough. And whether it's with medication or without, is that building in that self-kindness into the process, because it is a process. Like you mentioned, you got diagnosed 7 years ago. I got diagnosed a year ago, and others were diagnosed when they were children. So everyone's experience is different. Doing it at the same time, with your mom, did that help, or did you have things in common that you were both trying to address?
No, not necessarily. We do have some of the upsides in common, right? I always had like this bubbly household, both, have a lot of sense of humor, high on energy, always joking around, doing, acting a little bit weird or doing funny stuff, right? So that put that into perspective, like, oh, that's where this happiness comes from, right? So, but not necessarily there's one thing though, that's like being a little bit impulsive, right? So I made some decisions that were not good, or buying things that I don't need, or things in hindsight you were like, well, if I took a little bit longer to think about this, then I would probably made a different decision. But hey, I think that everyone does that, right? ADHD or not, everybody has decisions that they regret. Maybe
That later
me a
on
little
you
bit
think
more.
like, okay, yeah, I probably, if I slowed down a little bit and thought about different options or bounced that idea off somebody else, the result would have been different. And I think maybe there are cases that are more extreme than others, but I think that's a very human element. Who makes correct decisions every single time and never would say like, oh, maybe I should have thought about that a little bit more. I think that's a pretty common human experience. I just asked that though about the connection with your mom, because it's not uncommon for there to be, family characteristics that folks will notice. However, while there might be some similarities, there can obviously be very big differences. And something that you mentioned before we got started is the element of identity when it comes to ADHD. And this is something actually that I've talked about, but not on the podcast. It's been something for me as well too, is the struggle with the idea of, am I still me? Am I just my ADHD? Where does my ADHD stop and where do I start? How would I be without this? These sorts of questions I think are very natural. So what's your experience been with like that? And are there any conclusions or tips that you might be able to share?
Yeah. I try to distinguish what is me and what is ADHD, right? ADHme, ADHwe. But eventually I settled for like, this is just who I am, right? I can fight this or I can embrace it. And if I embrace it, then I can enhance it or control it, or whatever you will. But that made me realize that Everyone's unique, right? You can put a label on me like, okay, I got ADHD. Well, thanks for the label, right? But it doesn't necessarily change anything, right? And of course, I thought about, okay, who would I be if I didn't have that? Would I still have my sense of humor or my memory or my heightened sense of observation, which can be a good thing and a bad thing from time to time, right? Or would I be able to easily multitask or, eventually get into a laser focus or flow state, if you will, right? So it's, that's basically it.
No, I think it's a great reflection. And with the process of going through it, of sort of unpacking who was I before diagnosis as opposed to during the process and afterwards, I think it's something that some people, like I said, I can only speak for myself, definitely was a bit of a struggle, and also just not realizing. So for anyone who's out there that's a mental health professional, for anyone who's going through a diagnosis process, please explain to them that just when you get the diagnosis, it doesn't mean that all of this ends. There are other processes that start once those steps are taken. And I definitely don't feel like I was very well informed after I got diagnosed. And it was kind of just like, now go figure it out. I don't know how that is in the Netherlands, but it seems to be different in different countries. What's it like there?
Oh, there are specialized clinics that help you and support you and will guide you along the way. You have regular check-ins, also over phone, and then they want to see you again. And they have access to these different medications and they create these custom support plans basically because, everyone's different. Everyone has a different degree of ADHD or ADD, if you will, right? Without the H. That's another flavor, if you will. So I think it's a pretty good system. Yeah, I don't have anything to compare it with, right? But I felt understood and I felt that I had someone to answer my questions.
Very good.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of times the aspect of, hyper focus and being very observant and things like that. And there is sometimes a, back and forth between ADHD as being a superpower or also then the downsides that it may have, all of which are, like I said, it's a very personal question. But in your situation, where do you notice these things coming up where you feel like you have an advantage because of being, we can say, programmed that way or having a tendency to be able to really dive deep on something? Can you give me some examples?
Absolutely. I'm pretty good at problem solving or analytical thinking, right? It could also be a character trait and not necessarily related to ADHD, right? And that's how do you distinguish one from the other? But problem solving used a lot in my work. I'm always good at analyzing problems, determining trade-offs, right? Certain level of creativity. I used to draw a lot when I was younger. I don't really do it anymore, but I like to try to add that or use that creativity in my work. Come up with creative architectures. Think outside of the box, or like a creative solution to solve a specific challenge. I have a really good memory. I like to believe I have a sense of humor, right? But that's not really objective, I think. Heightened sense of observation, so I notice everything, right? And that's all the way from, okay, I buy new shoes, I look at them like, hey, this one is not manufactured correctly, right? And someone else looks at me like, well, just buy the damn shoes. Well, no, if I pay money for something, it needs to be good, right? But it can also, be quite annoying sometimes, right? And my girlfriend mentions to me like, yeah, you're the only one who sees that, no one else, right? And I'm busy with that. So is it reality, or am I just afflicting that on myself, right? If that makes sense.
No, it definitely makes sense. And I've definitely struggled with certain things of thinking that, like precisely what you just said, well, it is a reality for me, but perhaps it's a reality that I'm giving too much weight to or giving too much importance or making it bigger than it needs to be. And so understanding that while we go through life thinking that there's some kind of a sense of objectivity, a lot of these things on perceptions are very subjective. So while a message may be sent one way, it will be received another way. That's definitely been a case for me as well, with emotional dysregulation and rejection sensitivity dysphoria and perceptions of things being much worse than perhaps they actually are. Thinking, oh, this person thinks this, or someone said that, and this is what they mean. And then you find out later that absolutely wasn't the case. It was, really the opposite. So finding yourself in a situation of questioning whether or not your instincts are correct. In my case, it's been very tiring. I don't know how it's been for you, but just with that part that you mentioned about being very observant and perhaps noticing things that other people don't, how do you then anticipate that or sort of negotiate with yourself when, being in a situation where you feel like, am I maybe taking this too far, or someone else might not be seeing what I'm seeing? How do you sort of regulate that?
Well, that's a good question. I think I became a lot better at that over the last couple of years. So when I matured a little bit more, I'm able to put things into perspective a little bit more. Like, hey, I also have a tendency to perfectionism. I'm not sure if that's related to ADHD, but it could be to the heightened sense of observation because I see everything, right? And that goes from naming conventions to tagging policies, like being consistent throughout deployments, being consistent throughout cloud environments. And if something's out of the ordinary, then usually I get like an error, right? Internal server error, if you will, right? But eventually I was like, okay, this is becoming, I'm my worst enemy in that regard. The customer or the people that I work with don't even see that, don't even care about it. Right? And here I am just annoying myself about certain things not being 100% correct or not being like perfect. So that eventually led to me spending hours outside of my job to fix these things. Nobody was paying me for it. Nobody was seeing these things, but just to give myself like this internal rest or to calm myself a little bit. Like, okay, it's good enough now. But eventually that leads to a point that it becomes really inefficient. I'm like, well, maybe an 8 out of 10 is good enough because that's what people expect and that's what most people see. Right. So, and then you get to the 80-20 rule, and then, 80%, 20% effort for 80% of the result, and then 80% effort for the additional 20%. Right. So you're like, well, if I can, if my 80% is good enough for everyone, then why not just settle and just move on and focus on the next thing and add more value instead of, over perfecting something that's already good enough. Right. But to be honest, that took a while for me to reach that point.
Oh, it doesn't sound like it's something that comes overnight.
No.
And I think you described it very, very well. I think in my case, I've never considered myself a perfectionist because I look at other people that I would consider to be perfectionists about being very detail oriented. But what I would say is something that's come up in a lot of conversations is being very demanding with myself and being very hard on myself and being a very harsh critic of myself. And to the point where someone asks, like, who are the people that are telling you that you're doing everything wrong? And the only person who's ever said that is me. I didn't grow up with my parents telling me like, oh, wow, like you can't do anything, you're incapable, or teachers or stuff like that. Other people may have had those experiences, but it wasn't my case. But in my case, my assumption starting out something is that this is going to be very bad. People aren't going to like it. Part of that plays into a people pleaser sort of mentality, I think. And also the fear of being rejected. With that being so strong, it's a motivating force, although in a way that hurts in the process because it doesn't feel comfortable to be being in those thought patterns. And so when you express the fact that, it took time to work on that, I'm not surprised because that sounds tricky. And I'm really happy that you were able to do that and wish I could take a pen drive and plug those skills in. But I think that it's motivating in a way though, knowing that you have seen results working with that. And have you so you've done this mostly on your own, or you've done this you mentioned, the diagnosis process, but have you been doing this on a trial and error basis, or do you consult outside support?
Primarily trial and error, right? Stumbling, falling, getting back up, try to learn from your mistakes. Try not to be too hard on yourself if you fail, right? And I think that's a general life lesson for everyone, not just if you have ADHD, right? But there are certain things that work really well for me, and that is specifically having an organized home, and especially my work area. Right? Of course, I took it a little bit too far, kind of, towards OCD, like, everything needs to be in place, and I still have that. No, fun fact, I clean my own desk. I let no one else touch my desk because things are out of order, right? And I see it immediately, and there comes that detail oriented. It comes back again. But things like that. And if everything's in its place, that will give me rest, and that will allows my mind to focus on other things. So it's in a way, removing noise and removing distractions. And that can be different for everyone, right? So if you can, if you notice or can figure out what your biggest distractions are, right? For a lot of people, that's social media, right? We're talking on do not disturb mode right now because I don't want anything interfering with our conversation. Same goes for, put your phone away, close your door, close your window. My dog is in the living room now because I don't want him walking across the hallway, right? Things like that, because I know that I can, I'm easily distracted to a certain point, but at one point I cross that distraction threshold and I get into the flow or a flow state. There's a real great book about flow state. I cannot pronounce the name of the author. Always mess it up. Mikhail, something.
Yeah, I saw that is a very complicated surname.
Yes.
So I'm not going to, if that, Mihaly, I'm not even going to try to do it, but we'll drop that in the show notes.
Yeah.
We'll put that link. Okay, but tell me more about it.
Yeah, that's, everyone can get into a flow state, like a deep work kind of mode, right? And there's a list of requirements to get into a flow state, but eventually when you get into the flow state, and I think a lot of people would recognize that you lose sense of, you lose sense of time, right? And suddenly 2 hours pass, right? Some people have that with gaming, for example. But I have that with technology and the things that I do, because my work is my hobby, and that's the thing that's the luck that I was able to create for myself, basically, to figure out what I really enjoy and then excel at it. And then, everything that I do, or almost everything, apart from the countless meetings, I really enjoy. So that allows me to easily get into the flow state because I enjoy it. It needs, it needs to be challenging, but not too challenging. You need to be distraction free. There are certain things, prerequisites or requirements, if you will, before you can get into that flow state. But that's something that I categorize as my superpower, right? Because that allows me to really get a lot of high quality work done within a short amount of time. Plus, plus the endless energy and all the other goodness that comes with ADHD, if you will, allow me to excel at what I do.
Yeah, those are, anyway, excellent points. And I think that sometimes, in my case, having a lot of energy will be like, well, it's okay if there are distractions and things like that, because I can just kind of power through it because I won't get tired. But I really respect your point about thinking about for everybody, because not everyone's going to do the same thing. But what are the conditions that you need in order to work at your best? Think about, when is it that I've been at sort of, peak performance, and what were the things that influenced that? Having a healthy amount of pressure can be good, because if there's no pressure, then that's kind of a lack of stimulus. And you're like, well, this is boring. But I think whether it's a clean desk, I think in general, turning off social media, as someone who uses it way too much, so I can say that, but then actually doing is another thing. But it's quite simple. Like, just turn it off. Like, do not have LinkedIn, Twitter, WhatsApp web, all the other things you could possibly have open, and all the notifications off. When you talked about deep work, I have listened to podcasts. I haven't actually read Cal Newport's books, but that's something that's talked about a lot. And it's once again, is with everything, there's no silver bullet magic solution. But what he talks about is solitude deprivation, that we live in a period of time where it's very difficult to have, or it's more and more of a challenge to have no distractions. And because of that, being able to have a sort of pure state of mind where you can get the things done that you need to get done and not feel like the whole world is collapsing. But in some cases, for me, it's almost, flirting with disaster of like wanting to have distractions, because if there are distractions, then it increases the pressure, which then there's some kind of a adrenaline rush that comes from that, that you end up keep going back and back and back. What I want to get to with this, though, is what you mentioned previously about being a person who's able to multitask, also involved in different projects simultaneously. I mentioned before we started, I think there are more people in the Netherlands per capita than a lot of other countries that I've talked to that we'll have a primary source of income, but then we'll also have other projects at the same time.
Hmm.
But I want to know more about your experience of how you do more things and where you kind of find the limits. It's one thing when we sign up for something thinking, oh yeah, I can do this. It's another thing to sustain it.
Mhm.
What's your experience been like with that? And is there anything that you recommend for folks like myself or other folks with ADHD that often don't want to do just one thing?
Oh, with a lot of failure. Keep running into a wall from time to time. One of the benefits that I have, and that I never really burned out because I'm a really sensitive person, right? So I know myself, and I can already evaluate at Friday if I took it too far this week. Like, okay, am I burning the candle at both ends? Right? Okay, if so, I need to course correct. I need to change something, because otherwise, over time, I will burn out. And I do fail a lot. I try things, I fail. Of course, there are deadlines, certain things that I have to deliver. If I get distracted, that usually leads to procrastination, or procrastination leads to distraction, right? I haven't really figured that one out yet. But then suddenly I'm scrolling on YouTube and, oh, this seems interesting, right? Wasted 20 minutes of my day again, while I should have been working on the LinkedIn Learning course that I need to deliver before the end of, March, basically. Right. So, and then at the end, I have to sprint to get everything done in time. And then I do have a heightened sense of accomplishment, right? And that's a little bit the adrenaline rush that you just mentioned. So it is possible to do multiple things, but there is a limit, right? And another really interesting book is Essentialism, right? And that I still try to practice that. I came across that book not too long ago. And it's more about, the whole thing is about less, but better. So doing more of less, if that makes sense. Right, so to try to remove some of the, and there you go again with the noise, try to remove noise, try to remove distractions, try to move non-essential things that you now think about as essential. So how do you categorize these things, or how do you qualify something as non-essential versus essential? And then do more of the essential things. Right, so it's, but it's an ongoing process. Right, I luckily, and that's one of my benefits as well, I have a girlfriend who keeps me in check. So she's like, "You're doing too much." I'm like, well, no. And then a Friday, I'm all grumpy and burned out, or at least temporarily burned out, not permanently. I'm like, well, you're right. I took it too far. Or, I said yes to another course. She said, well, should you do that? I'm like, well, but I like because the whole process it doesn't suit me, right? So I figured that out by just going through it. The first time I was like, well, this was a pretty painful process. You do it for the first time. So I do realize if you do something over time, you will get better and better, of course. But you need to give yourself the time and the space to grow into something. So I was like, okay, I'm probably not going to do this again. And then I saw the end result and I was like, well, I want more of this. So I said yes to another one. Right. And I struggled my way through it again. So now I'm at a point, I'm like, well, this is not really my jam. Right. I like to create content. I like to share information, but I like to categorize myself more as off the hip content creation, if that makes sense. Right. Versus putting myself into these really narrow guardrails, and, I have to keep moving forward. I cannot deviate too much, because then the course doesn't make any sense anymore. And, I have my script that I need to stick to, and, I cannot move my mouse too fast when I'm sharing my screen, and, things like that. So it's, it's, I don't know. It's just a continuous process of just analyzing and evaluating, like, am I doing too much or not? Can I handle a little bit more? And what definitely helps is doing things that I really love to do, or think I love to do in the case of course creation, but it ties into technology. I really love technology. So most of the things related to technology are things that fulfill me, right? And if it's fulfilling and enjoyable to do, and it leads to certain results that I haven't really thought about before, like a CNCF ambassador program that I suddenly am part of, right? So it's it's like this continuous thing of doing what you love, to be able to do more than will be able to do if you do stuff that you don't love. Yeah, I'm going on a rant here a little bit.
Not at all, not at all, not at all. And for me is that in general, if I can't find passion or some kind of a meaningful experience in what I'm doing, it's going to be pretty hard for me to keep doing it. And not everybody's wired that way, and that's fine. Like, I'm very happy that the world isn't full of me's. That'd be really annoying. But I really hear you on that, like you said, I think the example of the LinkedIn course is a great one. That yes, there were some elements that were very rigid in terms of the structure and stuff like that. You're like, okay, it's not really what but the good thing is that there are other ways to do it. It's like you said, if you like to do, fresher sort of stuff, that's not where it's not going to be as obsessive about everything having to match these certain criteria and things like that, well, then that's okay. And so it's not, I don't know if this can be stated as, a blanket fact, but I don't really believe in the idea of a waste of time anymore. It's only a waste of time, I think, if you continually do something that you really don't like, but using this as a learning experience. Now you've tried it, you know how it is. And if you ever decided to go back to it for whatever reason, that's okay. But like you said, is that you do have something that's passionate, that's rewarding inside of that. And so it did make it worth it. However, long-term, maybe it's not the most suitable option, but I think that's a lot of it as well in this process, is not thinking it has to be all or none, that you can try something. If it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. And if I sat down and thought about all the different things that I've tried and how many of them haven't worked, the list would be very long. So it's no big deal there. But I do think that whether you have ADHD or not, trying to find something that does motivate you and that you're passionate about. I mean, I don't know how often it happens to you, but the amount of conversations of people complaining about their jobs, and not only people complaining about their jobs, but people that have lots of opportunities and different things that they could do. And while it's totally human and everyone's allowed, and it's in their right to complain about their jobs, not looking for that passionate element. And that's the thing for me, I could be paid super well in a lot of places, but if I don't feel that there's some kind of creativity or some kind of additional energy that's going into it, it's going to be very hard for me to do it. And so that's why I've been a freelancer for the last 5 years, and I have no plan on changing that. So yeah, I definitely hear you on that. In terms of your work as a mentor, how did that get started?
Trying to make the world a better place. Try to level the playing field. At this point, I am mentoring 2 individuals that don't have the same opportunities as that I have from an educational perspective, or a money perspective, or a lot of other perspectives. So it's like, hey, I want to make a difference, and even if it's just one person at a time, then that's the way it is. So I'm now mentoring an individual who is really killing it, right? He's showing dedication, grit. And that fulfills me. It's I'm doing it pro bono, if you will. I'm even paying certain smaller things to get him the content that he needs for certification or stuff like that, building real world projects together. It just makes me feel good. It makes me happy, right? Being able to help someone grow, basically.
It's really, really good.
Yeah. That's all. That's to it.
No, but I think it's fantastic. I think it's something that actually I've spoken about with different people in the CNCF about ambassadors. For me, in a perfect world, every ambassador would mentor somebody. And there are many different ways of doing it. So I'm not saying it has to be, a 2-hour call every day or even a 2-hour call every month or whatever, but finding a way, we talk about this phrase a lot, pay it forward. And so I think that everyone in their own way can do the same thing. And for all of us that are in this position, we're in this position partially for whether it's because of natural intelligence or where we're born or who our parents were, the access to education that we had, all those other things are certain advantages that many people in many different countries have not had access to. And so I think it's a privilege to be able to do that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
And I think it's wonderful that you're doing that. So great. That's really, really cool. Would you, in the sense of, I imagine that the people that you're mentoring don't have ADHD, but if you did have to mentor somebody with ADHD, if you had to whittle it down to, a few pieces of practical Dutch advice, because Dutch people are very practical in a way that I envy. What would your core things be? If you had to just say like, okay, we're going to keep it really, really simple. I understand that many cases, each case is different, But based on your experience, having been diagnosed 7 years ago, going through this process, deciding that the medication route wasn't for you, all the different things that you've gone through, what are the core pieces of advice that Robin would give?
Oh, be kind to yourself. I think that's we talked about that before we started the recording, right? That's something you highlighted as well. And that's a really good way to put it, right? Be kind to yourself. Make sure that your basic needs are met in terms of sleep, right? Sleep enough, move enough, so regular exercise, good food. I like to keep a simple to-do list. I tried loads of different things from Kanban boards to whatever, and eventually I always come back to just a simple to-do list. And I don't write it down. I have a digital one. Something else that really works for me, remove distractions, something we talked about already. I think that's crucial, but that's not crucial for someone with ADHD. That's crucial for anyone because everyone's distracted, right? They say that multitasking is not a good thing, right? So I think that I can pretty efficiently multitask, but I would be more efficient if I could just focus on one thing, right? So focus on one thing is always better than multitasking. So if you can create that situation where you can focus on a single thing at a time, that will allow you to really achieve results, right? Versus multitasking. And of course, I run different projects. I'm in different meetings. We have all these different things, leading people, leading a team. So I think multitasking is inherent with my work at this point, but I do need some focus time to get actual stuff done. I still code, I still, build things as well, because that's what I love to do. So I try to do that at least one day a week, preferably in focus blocks of 4 hours, right? So I just block my calendar, and it doesn't always work as well. Certain meetings have certain priorities, but I really try to give myself a break from all that stuff and then just block time. So blocking time, removing distractions, I minimize meetings because these things just drain, right? And just try to organize your life, right? Your life. Oh, that's a pretty broad topic, but so I start by organizing your workspace, organize your home, get rid of a lot of stuff that you don't need, because that will lead to mental clarity. Yeah. So it's not just one advice, but hopefully these are practical things that everyone can implement. So yeah,
I think they are, and I think everyone has to do it in their own way. And what you said about organizing your time and anticipating that those distractions will linger. Like the YouTube rabbit hole is always going to be there. Talking to friends, starting to blur lines on what's work and what's social and things like that. And then also the aspect of meetings, but making sure that those things are blocked off. It's interesting that you mentioned the thing about a to-do list. Is that I think I've tried like 4 different things, and I still write emails to myself when it's really important as well too, because I know it's going to be there.
Yeah, you used to do that as well.
Yeah. So often when I'm in a meeting, just have like a draft email that's ready so that I know it's going to be saved no matter what. I think I'm still subscribed to Evernote, and to the Evernote folks out there, you need to improve your software for people that, it's not their fault. I know there are people that use Todoist. I have a document open where I put lots of stuff, but sometimes I find that there's just too much stuff there, and I feel like I'm never going to get to it in an efficient manner. So anyway, it's different for everybody, but I think the main thing is trying something. In the past, I used to just have everything inside my head, and it was absolute chaos. So getting it out in some way, externalizing, whether it's on a piece of paper or in some kind of digital format, I think is definitely recommendable. And taking time to take breaks, like you said, the elements of exercise, healthy diet, and getting, I think it's unlikely that I'll ever sleep too much. That's not a problem I'm really worried about having. That'd be a great problem to have. So yeah, I think that's all very practical advice. Well, this was great, Robin. I really, really appreciate being able to meet today. We talked about doing this quite some time ago, so it's nice to see it actually happen and not just another ADHD thing that happens to some people. Oh, let's do this. It never happens. So I'm really glad we got to connect. I look forward to connecting more also as CNCF ambassadors. That's really cool. whether it's online or in person. And looking forward to future conversations with you.
Absolutely. Likewise, was my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I would like to highlight one thing. So if anyone is struggling with ADHD or anything else, I'd reach out. I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm approachable. I love to help out. Of course, I have limited time, but if I can, point someone in the right direction, or maybe just help out with something small, more than happy to do so.
That's fantastic. And I think it's one of the benefits of doing this podcast is that it's a way of reminding people that the folks that are being interviewed on here, once again, we would all love to spend as much time as we possibly could doing this. However, time may be limited, but to folks out there that aren't sure, depending on what country you're in, like I said, just having conversations literally today with someone who's having difficulties based on where they live, and do not suffer in silence, right? There are a lot of resources out there, but that can also be overwhelming. I think like anything in life, what's helpful is to talk to people. Not saying that I'm a mental health professional, so I always want to keep that in mind as well in terms of what I can recommend or not. But do not suffer in silence. We're happy to talk, to point you in whatever direction we can. And if even it's just a question of having a 15-minute conversation, knowing that you're being heard, I think that's of extreme value as well. So Robin, I will be referring people to you the next time somebody reaches out. But I'm really glad you said that you're the first person on the podcast to say that. And I think everybody else who's been on the podcast is also, is aligned with that. But I think it's a healthy reminder to everyone out there that do not suffer in silence. Asking is for free. And if for whatever reason, if we don't get back to you, just ask again, and we'll make it happen. So thank you for mentioning that. Good stuff. All right. Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.